Ministries of the IDB organized by the IDB Research Department. We have simultaneous interpretation into English and Spanish. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can choose the language of your choice.
President and Executive Vice President of the IDB, Reina Mejía, giving opening remarks, and the IDB Chief Economist, Parrado, with the program introduction. Mrs. President Mejía, the microphone is yours.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the IDB, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the 56th meeting of the Network of Central Banks and Finance Ministry of Latin America and the Caribbean. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces. It is the second year in a row that we do this event in a hybrid manner. And your participation, it's what is making it every time more powerful, more impactful, and now for 25 years. As all you know, we're facing extraordinary challenges globally and overlapping risks. And certainly, Latin America and the Caribbean are not the exception. I believe that extraordinary challenges call for extraordinary commitments, extraordinary leaderships, but this means making tough decisions that prioritize the impact they will have on the lives of our people. This means putting people before politics, putting people before our own personal agendas. It is a big responsibility. As the world economy was recovering from the devastating impact of COVID-19, Russia's war on Ukraine generated new significant challenges, including a sharp increase in commodity prices and a slowdown in growth. This is why today's discussion are so relevant. Your presence here, it is so important to put forward the remarkable expertise and experience to address these unprecedented times, these unprecedented challenges. I believe neither of us have prepared for this. I believe neither of us have lived this before. Since the conflict began, we have seen downward corrections to some commodity prices, but others remain very high, such as oil, soybeans. On average, this increase will have a positive effect on growth in our region this year, but the impacts vary across countries. The IMF just projected GDP growth at 3.5% in 2022, a decrease from 7% in 2021. Across the board, growth forecasts for 2023 have been revisited and have been revised to 1.7% as policy dilemmas intensify. At this projected growth rate, the region will continue to lose its share in global GDP and will affect the aspirations and expectations of our citizens. Probably the greatest challenge for the world economy is to combat increasing inflationary pressures. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, skyrocketing prices for basic goods are linked to primary supply factors and less to monetary aspects associated with high demand. One risk is that inflation expectation spirals out of control, making it more difficult to reverse the trend and possibly requiring more aggressive monetary adjustments. This presents a challenge for policymakers and for each one of you who are here today. while there are limits for what monetary policy can do under current context, let's remember that expectations cannot take a life on their own. So what really worries me today is that inflation has a disproportionately negative effect on the poor, who have the fewest tool to combat it. So our estimate indicates that in a scenario of a 20% increase in food prices will generate 9.5 million people falling into poverty in the region. I repeat, an additional 9.5 million people in poverty. And to have it in context, this is bigger than the population in New York City. So this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable for me. And we should do everything in our power to avoid this. And the good news, I believe, is that we can do it. Policy makers have tried to mitigate the impact of high inflation via transfers and subsidies. Still, there is limited space for fiscal expansion because debt levels have already increased. They increased during the pandemic. They'll continue increasing. So there's no room for this. And that adds another dilemma to the one in the room and to all of us, is control public spending. We need to be more efficient in public spending. A cash transfer large enough to cover the deficit of basic food, large enough to have the basic for the poor population, will mean around $1.3 billion a month, or 0.4% of the region's GDP. How do we pay for that? Well, we estimate the region can save around 4% of the GDP by ensuring transfers are only given to those who really need them. And among others, eliminating overpricing in purchases. Cash transfer programs should be expanded also to reach new and vulnerable populations that might fall into poverty, like women, migrants, minorities, and groups in rural areas that are very hard to reach. And let's not forget the importance of food and nutrition. Programs to guarantee basic food consumption can complement this step, and good targeting will be key to making this happen under current constraints. Today, the region has better instruments to help those who need it. Policymakers should take advantage of the innovative new digital technologies that resulted from the pandemic and use this to assist them, those in need, in an effective way. And I think you heard me mention it in previous speeches. We cannot take one step backwards on digital transformation, on using the tools that we have used and we have been proved to be effective during pandemic. At the same time, we must not lose sight of priorities for long-term growth that is sustainable and inclusive, such as climate financing and social spending. Just last week, Secretary Yellen said that climate changes was an existential threat to our planet and called on the Development Bank to boost lending and explore financial innovations. We have new instruments to help ministers better target and measure their public spending on climate action and other instruments to raise more financing on climate-related projects. The IDB group has been a pioneer in establishing a green bond market through loans, guarantees, anchor investments, and technical cooperations. Today, the IDB and the IDB Invest, our sector arm, have supported 36 clients to issue 74 thematic bonds, including sustainable, blue bonds, and social. In fact, around 30% of volumes of this volume has been issued through us and supported by us and many others. So as you see, we have had our own internal challenges also as the IDB. But I want to reassure you today that our commitment to helping Latin America and the Caribbean to realize its full potential is unwavering. And our work continues to that end, with focus and determination, with passion and commitment to make sure that you have the tools to support our region. We will continue leveraging all our financial resources, developing new, more effective approaches, and sharing the expertise, the experience that we have in our bank for 6 decades. Today, you can rely on IDB Group to continue supporting all the needs in the region like we have done, as mentioned before, for the past 62 years. And I am very excited to see that these 2 days, we have a great, and I call it a prime opportunity to work together on smart policy prescriptions and chart the best path forward. We have extraordinary minds in the room, and you can bring all your creativity, your experience, your expertise, so we can all navigate this complex landscape. But we have to implement reforms necessary to strengthen our economies. You can also share best practices among yourself on what has worked in the region, what has worked for your countries. And you can all have this time to understand why did it work in your country and it didn't work in the other. What can work in your own country from the experiences of the other colleagues around the table. And this is one of the benefits, one of the main objectives of these 2 days. And I wanna thank Eric Parrado and his amazing team for organizing this meeting. So I really hope you enjoy this time. And when I mean enjoy, is like pick on everybody's brain, pick on us and say, hey, can we do something different? Can you help us on this? Take advantage of this opportunity that you have in front of you today. So Eric, thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time. Being here means a lot. It's your service, it's your time, it's your commitment. So thank you for that. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President Mejía, for these introductory remarks. This is an important event for the bank, but also an important event for the region. So I'm looking forward to have interesting discussions. And as President Mejía said, it's important to share experiences, to share our challenges, but also to share our opportunities. And welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining the 56th meeting of the Network of Chief Economists of Central Banks and Finance Ministries of Latin America and the Caribbean. As President Mejía said, this is a period when we need to strengthen the policy dialogue. Therefore, it's crucially important to make effort possible to meet and discuss. That is why I thank you all for participating. Your continued support and active participation are what makes this meeting so different and so special. This meeting has gained a deserved reputation as the forum for candid and open regional policy dialogue on macroeconomic issues. With this meeting, we are completing more than 25 years of consecutive meetings. I don't think there is any other forum that has remained active and relevant for so long. We at the research department are really proud of that. A lot of the discussion throughout the next 2 days will center on the changing global scape due largely to the war of Russia in Ukraine. The changing global outlook this year has, of course, changed the landscape of Latin America and the Caribbean. This is a new shock on top of the COVID-19 shock, and hits a time when the region had not fully recovered from the pandemic. We are confronting difficult times. This is evident in the monetary and the fiscal fronts. On the monetary front, the biggest problem, of course, is rising inflation. Inflation had been relatively low during the pandemic, is not anymore, especially after the onset of Russia's war in Ukraine. Inflation spiked across all monetary regimes, including fixers. As it will be discussed later today, higher inflation was driven primarily by real factors rather than monetary policy considerations. This is clearly reflected in food prices. Here, there are several factors to consider. First, food prices are affected through the rise in the price of energy, and they are impacted more directly by the increase in the price of cereals that Russia and Ukraine export. And third, they are also impacted by the rising price of fertilizers that affect agriculture and livestock in the region. These combined effects lead to an increase in the price of raw materials and therefore of food, which has exceeded the levels previously observed during the pandemic. Rising food inflation will have an impact on already growing poverty and inequality in the region. The rebound in economic activity in the post-pandemic has yet to produce a similar recovery in jobs and wages, particularly at the bottom of the wage distribution. In addition, the poorest households constitute the income group most negatively affected by food inflation, which puts greater pressure on their expenses. The impact of higher food prices on poverty or food security indicators in different countries depends on their typical consumption basket, the economy's structure, the composition of their agri-food trade, the magnitude of the price increases, and the diversification of input supplies, among other factors. Most studies find a short-term relationship between higher food prices and poverty, with direct implications on access to food items, both in terms of quality and quantity. This is especially relevant today in Latin America and the Caribbean, where poverty affects more than 200 million people, 32% of their population. The war has also had severe impacts on the fiscal front. The fiscal impacts of the war are heterogeneous across countries. Fiscal deficits are likely to increase up to 0.7 percentage points of GDP in countries that subsidize fuels. In countries that export crude oil, revenues can increase and compensate the higher spending, but it will take some time. As a result, rising oil prices are likely to hinder efforts to reduce fiscal deficit in the region in the short run, while the medium run impacts are uncertain and heterogeneous. The future trajectory of the debt to GDP ratio will hinge on the speed of economic recovery, the pace of fiscal adjustment, interest rates, and commodity prices. After falling in 2021 amidst the strong GDP rebound, the debt to GDP ratio was expected to hit 73% of GDP for the average country by 2024, as growth diminished and higher interest rate increased finances cost. But debt projections are very sensitive to the assumed price of oil. Irrespective of possible debt trajectories, the reality of the region is that with higher deficit and debt levels, fiscal needs are large and fiscal space is very limited. There are many areas where policymakers can work to smooth the impact of the war, and at the same time, set the basis for improving the region's resilience to future shocks. That brings me back to today and the relevant discussion we're about to embark on. As President Mejía said, the IDB Group is very well positioned and stand ready to support the public and private sectors of the region of doing this. The conference that we are about to start is an example of this commitment to find solutions for the region, and we need to engage the broader public in the discussions. One of the key innovations that we have introduced to these meetings in recent years is that we have included public sessions in addition to the usual closed working sessions. I want to invite all the audience to tune in and participate in the public sessions. The first public session will place today at 1:30 p.m. It is a keynote address by Princeton professor and former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, Alan Blinder, on the current debates about inflation with a focus on the United States. In particular, the Federal Reserve has been criticized for being slow to start raising interest rates, is now catching up, and Professor Blinder will address the two questions which is the focus of the debate. How high must interest rate go to curb inflation, and how quickly must the Fed get there? The second public session will take place at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, shortly after Professor Blinder's talk. We will host a panel of finance ministers from the region that Benigno Lopez, Vice President of Sectors and Knowledge at the IDB, will moderate. We were going to have the finance ministers of Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Jamaica, and Uruguay. And we will discuss the prospect for recovery and how fiscal policy has been affected in the region since the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine. The discussion will center on fiscal policy responses, the risks, and the opportunities. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we will host the third and final public session. It will be a conversation with central bank governors from Costa Rica, Ecuador, Jamaica, and Paraguay, who will discuss with Marta Ruiz-Arranz, IDB's Regional Economic Advisor for Central America, Haiti, Mexico, Panama, and the Dominican Republic, about the prospects for monetary policy and health of financial systems in the region. This couldn't be more topical as the central banks in the region face the challenge of growing inflationary pressures while having to engineer policies to maintain financial stability. Let me end these remarks with a call for action. We need coordinated policy action, and coordination is now more important than ever. One individual country may not have the fiscal or monetary space to boost the domestic economy and to compensate for the fall in external demand, but if policy interventions are coordinated, the collective boost can support economies' recovery. This is not time for economic isolation. We instead need more integration, not less, to repair the economic damage that will be inflicted by the war. That is why we need to strengthen regional policy dialogues like this one, inviting all stakeholders to sit around the table. So good morning, and thank you very much for joining us these 2 days. Many thanks. So now we're going to continue.